Oh! Hey fellow movie buffs, today I'll be reviewing the 1959 film The Human Condition, which was directed by Masaki Kobayashi and released on Blu-ray in 2021 by the Criterion Collection. This is a 2K restoration by Shochiku in Tokyo from the original camera negative. At a few points, usually in landscape shots with a brighter horizon, you can see some discoloration near the center top of the frame, but it's not too distracting. Otherwise, it was clean and sharp with good tonal range in the black and white print. The audio, as usual from Criterion, is solid. The original audio from the film might be the only thing that occasionally betrays the film's age. The sound effects of gunfire and slaps are dated. But again, this is from the original film, not the restoration. Disc 1 and Disc 2, parts 1 through 4 of the film, are in 1.0 mono, remastered from a 35mm optical soundtrack print. The third installment, parts 5 and 6, on Disc 3, was apparently the first Japanese multi-channel stereo film, so this transfer uses a 4.0 surround soundtrack from the original 4-track stems. Full transparency, I never noticed the difference. When it comes time to watch this again, I'll pay more attention to that. The packaging is relatively bare bones, just a standard disc case, no slipcase or anything fancy like that, though they do have a booklet inside the case with an excellent essay by film critic and historian Philip Kemp. The custom cover artwork by Sarah Habibi is not one of my favorites from Criterion. The image is taken directly from the movie, and it's a stunning shot, but it doesn't convey much about the movie itself. This release comes with 3 discs, and instead of something like a multi-page digipack, to better handle them, they use a type of case where Disc 1 overlaps Disc 2 and Disc 3 is on the other side. This makes it harder to get the discs in and out, especially if you're trying not to scrape one with the other. You can kind of see here what I'm talking about. Other extras include an excerpt from a 1993 interview with director Kobayashi, conducted by filmmaker Masahiro Shinoda, a 2009 interview with the star of the film, Tatsuya Nakadai, and an appreciation of the film and Kobayashi, again by Shinoda. And of course, trailers. Both Shinoda and Nakadai, the latter from an interview on the Criterion disc for Kobayashi's Harakiri, made it seem like Kobayashi's films are almost a direct response to the studio films from Japan at the time. Whereas the legendary Yasujiro Ozu's films focused on smaller melodramas set in their immediate surroundings, with his longtime collaborator and star, Chishu Ryu, often playing similar characters, usually a patriarch, Kobayashi made films related to Japan's place in the world, particularly after the war, with Nakadai stretching his range whenever needed. Don't get me wrong, all the Ozu movies I've seen are wonderful and deeply engrossing, and seeing Ryu appear on the screen is like watching a beloved relative coming to visit, but the importance of Kobayashi's place in Japanese cinema shouldn't be overlooked. In Kobayashi's interview, he explains how this was an independent production, so he couldn't use any cinematographers who were on contract with the studios. And that's how we landed on Yoshio Miyajima. Kobayashi gave him the freedom to plan the shots and the camera positions, and he was so dialed into Kobayashi's vision that almost without fail, he would end up with exactly what Kobayashi had envisioned. It's worth noting another slight annoyance related to the packaging. The extras are spread out over the 3 discs. I'm not the type who will watch any of these things until I've watched the movies, so when I wanted to take a look at these, I had to keep getting up to switch discs. It's a much better experience to be able to browse and preview the extras in one sitting. This might have been on account of storage constraints on the discs, but if that's the case, then it would have been better to include them on a 4th bonus features disc. I know, first world problems, right? As for the review, and this does contain mild spoilers ahead, like any movie that's 9.5 hours long, The Human Condition requires patience. But it's not one of those, it's long, but if you're patient, it'll reward you in the end type of movies, which is obviously a long-winded euphemism for it's slow. The Human Condition rewards from the beginning, letting us get to know the clearly formed protagonist inside out, so every choice he makes matters to us, every outcome hitting us in the gut. Masaki Kobayashi's World War II epic is based on the largely autobiographical novel of the same name by Junpei Gomikawa, and, according to essayist Philip Kemp, also closely parallels Kobayashi's own wartime biography. Divided into 6 parts, it was initially released as 3 separate movies over 2 years starting in early 1959. No Greater Love covers the star Kaji's tenure at a labor camp. Road to Eternity follows Kaji as he's conscripted, sent to boot camp, and ultimately the front lines. And A Soldier's Prayer covers his torturous journey to get back home to his wife, delusions of an intact soul having long been eradicated. It's come to be viewed as a singular picture, and apparently it's screened annually as such in Japan, though I couldn't find showtimes. Kaji is a young office worker, seemingly fresh out of college, deeply in love with Michiko and deeply opposed to the war. Unlike his closest friend and many others, he's lucky enough to avoid the draft and instead gets sent by his company to help run a forced labor mining camp in Japan, occupied Manchuria. This should be a win-win. Not only can he avoid fighting in a war he believes is unjust, but he has an opportunity to bring a sense of humanity to the workers at the camp. Cuddled with Michiko in the back of a military cargo truck, wrapped in a blanket and in his pacifistic ideals, Kaji embarks into the unknown, simultaneously fearful of what's to come and elated to be with his wife. Once at the labor camp, he clashes almost immediately with the old guard, who scoff at his assertion that humane conditions would lead to higher production. Kobayashi's deft characterizations in these early scenes is critical, showing Kaji's youthful arrogance when he lectures the camp commanders on how he changed things, without spending so much as a single minute to see what the camp is like and what he's up against. Not only do we see Kaji as a less than perfect person, he likely would have had more success had he shown some tact and humility, but willingly or not, we relate to the camp commanders who have no patience for crusades and peg him as a leftist. This branding will follow him for the rest of his life. As it happens, and in Kobayashi's view in particular, Kaji is mostly right, but not everything is that easy when you're dealing with other humans with their own needs, desperation, and unpredictability. This is even more apparent when Chinese POWs are added to the camp. Being less inclined than the civilian prisoners to stay locked up as slave labor, they change the camp's dynamic and indirectly pull the first major cards out of Kaji's house of morality. Among other things, he works with the madam of the civilian prostitutes in the camp to provide the POWs with services, and he looks the other way at escape plans. These means are effective to a degree, but mostly they encircle him in politics between the prostitutes, the madam, the guards, the commanders, and the prisoners, specifically the ones intent on escaping. This becomes a recurring theme. The more Kaji tries to help others, the less he's able to balance everyone's opposing angles. The more he finds himself at odds with the powers that be, the more he suffers the consequences. At each stage, this results in him getting relocated or outright punished, sending him one step deeper into this abyss. The conflict between Kaji and the camp commanders is, of course, unsustainable. After a prisoner escape for which he's blamed, he's sent up to the Japanese Kwantung Army for his own good. His first stop is basic training, where Kaji's unfaltering integrity makes him the strongest recruit and, ironically, the best killer. He also finds himself unable to look away from the abuses of new recruits at the hands of the veterans and the commanders. Soon enough, he's back in the middle of the fray and paying the consequences. While a harrowing execution scene at the labor camp echoed Stanley Kubrick's Paths of Glory, released just a couple years earlier, much of the boot camp saga feels like it was replicated in kind by Kubrick nearly 30 years later in Full Metal Jacket. One of Kaji's fellow recruits, Obara, is clearly not cut out for boot camp, much less the battlefield. He's clumsy, blind without his glasses, and a terrible shot, glasses or not. In one brutal sequence, the squad is on a long march. Obara can't keep up and nearly passes out from exhaustion, despite Kaji taking on most of the load he was carrying.
You don't need half that shit. I'll haul it for you. But next time you check with me first, all right?
Kaji finally cracks and berates Obara for not being able to continue. The anguish on Kaji's face for succumbing to his frustration is palpable the entire time. When Obara's shortcomings start to affect the others, they turn to vicious bullying, ultimately driving him to an eerily identical fate as Private Pyle in Kubrick's film.
This is my rifle! There are many like it, but this one is mine!
This is the turning point for Kaji at boot camp. His pleas to the commanders to punish the ones who bullied Obara become borderline orders, and that doesn't go over well with them. Kaji finds himself on a long train ride to the battlefront, culminating in the one major battle scene of the entire film. This battle scene is astonishing, especially given when it was made. The choreography and camera movement have a modern cinematic feel. We see a spattering of foxholes where Japanese soldiers with machine guns, bolt-action rifles, and pistols are squaring off against a tank battalion that stretches across the entire landscape. This highlights the battle's futility, reminiscent of the Western Front in World War I, where the territorial gains were imperceptible despite massive casualties. After this battle, we follow Kaji and a couple other survivors on their arduous journey toward hopeful freedom in southern Manchuria. Along the way, they'll encounter starvation, deserters, refugees, a platoon of Japanese soldiers who don't know or don't care that the war is likely over, and more starvation. Eventually, another one of Kaji's choices, one he of course makes for all the right reasons, lands him in a Soviet POW camp. And here the human condition comes full circle. Kaji, now a prisoner himself, still does what he can to make the labor camp barely survivable. But instead of trying to change things from the top, he's angling from the inside, gaming the system wherever he can to survive. These later scenes in the Russian POW camp might just be Kobayashi's most searing indictment of the Japanese military. On more than one occasion, it's the Russians who show any semblance of reason and mercy. Arguably the most striking shot of the entire film is after he's confessed to the Russians, first to stealing garbage scraps for food, but then more significantly that he harmed Chinese and Russians after the fighting ended. Assuming he sealed his fate, he sits near the ground, bending over so his upper torso and head are parallel to the horizon and taking up near the entire frame. Only parts of him emerge from the shadows, namely his fingers as they pillage through his hair, pulling in desperation for a glimpse of sanity or the life he had before the Imperial Army stole it. Kobayashi sits on this image, letting us absorb it. What makes it all the more powerful is that Kaji didn't need to experience being a prisoner in harrowing conditions in order to fight for humane treatment way back when he himself was a camp supervisor. Back then, he was running on pure empathy. The blocking in these later scenes mirrors the earlier passages at the first camp, highlighting how Kobayashi maintains a consistent look and feel throughout the entire span of the film. In both scenes, Kaji stands alone, facing the leaders of the camp who were backed by a large flag of Japan earlier, and now by a director's portrait of Stalin, which is even bigger than the Japanese flag was. Without a word of dialogue, the power dynamics of the room are clear, and we understand what Kaji is up against. Also masterful is how Kobayashi's sets and locations are packed with detail and living energy. When Kaji arrives at the first camp, gusting winds create a shroud of dust over the vast Manchurian landscape. Those tanks in the battle scene and their barrage of artillery are larger than life. An oft-used refrain by Kobayashi and cinematographer Yoshio Miyajima is framing slave labor or soldiers against the enormous landscape, usually at golden hour. Early on, it's a never-ending line of laborers marching up a hillside, silhouetted against the vast landscape. Later, it's the soldiers in a similar composition. Even later, it's Kaji by himself. It reminds us how meaningless the suffering is in the grand scheme of things, but also keeps us visually in sync with the progression of the story. More poignantly, every character is full of life and dimension. From the prisoners he supervises, to his fellow recruits, to the camp commanders who might want to do things differently but are hamstrung by those above them or they're loyal to their country, to the people Kaji meets on his endless journey after the battle, to the Russians running their POW camp. Every last person we encounter feels like a living person. Several particularly rich and fascinating characters come and go. Or just go. In the first labor camp, Kaji forges an alliance with Okishima, So Yamamura, a mid-level manager of sorts stuck between the camp commanders and the rank-and-file guards, who is more than open to a fresher approach to treating the prisoners. Sometimes he and Kaji are at odds because Okishima is more grounded in the reality of the camp, but they build a mutual respect for and dependency on each other. Or Tange, played by Takatoshi Naito, a kindred spirit Kaji meets in the infirmary who leaves his mark even though his presence is short-lived. Kaji immediately notices and appreciates Tange's wisdom, and we feel Kaji's loss when Tange leaves. Or Michiko, who never hesitates to shine a mirror at Kaji when she suspects his morals are compromised. Michio Aratama plays her with such warmth and self-assurance that she becomes an anchor for Kaji, making a lasting enough impression that even though she increasingly becomes a distant memory, we never lose sight of her or lose sight of Kaji's determination to reunite with her. And of course, the legendary Tatsuya Nakadai as Kaji gives a performance as epic as the picture itself, carrying us on his back for the entire 9.5 hours. At every stage, he portrays a natural earnestness while simultaneously telegraphing his inner turmoil. His overall disposition changes as Kaji's circumstances change, which is crucial to keeping us connected to him and to the story. Rumor has it that Nakadai was clerking in a small shop when Kobayashi happened to wander in. They struck up a conversation, Kobayashi put him in his next picture, the thick-walled room, and the rest is history. He not only collaborated often with Kobayashi after this, including in Kobayashi's other masterpiece, Harakiri, but he worked with just about every famous Japanese director until he died last year. The contrast between a conscientious objector ultimately fighting in the war to which he objects is the driving force of the film and the exact reason why it's so engaging. Over the course of the picture, we see Kaji's boundaries pushed, stretched, broken, and reclaimed, and because we're with him for so long and know him so well, we feel his internal torment at each step. A major part of why we're so connected to Kaji is directly because of how much time we've spent with him and how deeply Nakadai embodies him. It's not a slight to mention that this nearly 10-hour war movie only has one battle scene. On the contrary, it's a credit to Kobayashi that the human condition can make you feel the horrors of war without drowning us in carnage. Instead of showing battle scenes, which inevitably can have you rooting for one side or another, Kobayashi focuses on the effects of war. What the human condition drives home is that most of these decisions are made by politicians and military brass, but it's the soldiers on the ground and civilians who pay the most severe consequences. Every decision even Kaji himself makes, including when it's for the best, and it usually is, has disastrous consequences. Thus is the nature of war. If The Human Condition is not the best anti-war movie ever made, in my book it is, it certainly belongs in the conversation with classics like All Quiet on the Western Front and Paths of Glory. Their sheer length alone brings us closer to feeling the horrors of war, and our identification with Kaji brings us closer to feeling the pointlessness. Letterboxd recently put out a list of the top 500 rated films on their site. All 3 releases of The Human Condition are within the top 25, with Part 3, A Soldier's Prayer, coming in at number 2, behind none other than Harakiri. Of course, any list is subjective, but while hardly definitive, at least a list like this from Letterboxd is compiled from folks who are geeked out enough about films to log and rate them on a website. So those are my thoughts on The Human Condition. If you like this video, feel free to give it a like. If you like my channel's content, please subscribe. And if you have anything to say about this video or anything else, feel free to drop a comment down below and I'll try to respond to everybody. Otherwise, thanks for watching and I'll see you next time.